For me now, that financial freedom is being in that position where work is optional, and that's where I am at the moment. I class it as sort of semi-retirement, but I can sustain it for long enough for me to be able to really step out, being the age that I am, sort of 47, and being smack bang in the heart of perimenopause. And I was like, look what I've done. I've created myself a little capsule in the woods to protect myself. I sort of described it to a friend once as a radical act of self-love. Most councils are tiny house positive, right? They have got far greater issues to deal with. As long as you good favour with your neighbours, then you're good to go. As soon as a neighbour complains to the council, they have to get involved.
What does it take to be a financially empowered woman? And what can financially empowered women do together to change the world? A shocking statistic is that around 400,000 women in Australia are at risk of homelessness. And the cause of this is the lack of education about how to build a financial foundation, starting even before we first enter the workforce and well into our retirement years. My name's Dionne Payne, and I'm the founder of the Financially Empowered Women podcast. I'm passionate about ending homelessness, and as part of that passion, I chose to look at the systemic barriers that are causing homelessness for women in the first place. The Financially Empowered Women podcast is designed to bring you the best experts from around the world to increase your financial know-how and give you practical and women-specific tips to overcome the challenges you might be facing, such as how to negotiate a better salary, demystifying super, or how to navigate a separation and ensure the assets are distributed fairly. My role is to provide you with the best information out there to change your trajectory and become a financially empowered woman, because you deserve it, and the world needs you more than ever to own your worth and help others to do the same.
Hi everyone, and welcome to the Financially Empowered Women podcast. Today I am joined by Danielle Lester, and I'd love to share a little bit about Danielle. Danielle is a construction, engineering and real estate professional and academic who used her expertise to do something the industry didn't expect: build her own tiny house and step off the mortgage treadmill. Her documentary about that journey has sparked a national conversation, and as president of the Australian Tiny House Association, she's working to make alternative housing a real option for every Australian. Welcome, Danielle.
Thank you. Yeah.
I am so inspired by what your journey has actually shown so far, and also what you're trying to do as well. So I'd love to just take it back right to the beginning. Tell us a little bit about what life was like for you growing up, and how that has translated into what you're doing now.
Yeah, okay. So I know when I was much younger, I was always very interested in construction and building and how things fit together and how things work. And that led to me sort of starting my studies in the world of business, just general business. And then I ended up from that doing a bit of an add-on to my degree, which was property valuation. So that brought me into the whole world of the built environment. From that, I went on to study construction management after a few years in the industry as a quantity surveyor. And then from that, I went on to civil engineering. So I kind of went from the big picture down to the granular level detail. But from a sort of more personal perspective, I think what's led me into that whole space was being part of an incredibly large family, and connecting where I am right now in my tiny house world, looking back and thinking about the fact that as the second eldest of seven, how I was always trying to carve out my own space somewhere in the house that was just mine, means that I've now done that. I've got this nice little sort of house for one. that nobody else can sort of take from me. But yeah, so in terms of sort of carving all that space out for myself, that's kind of how I ended up in the world of the built environment. And I guess my later studies with the civil engineering and the PhD that I did was more along the lines of behavioural economics, and really understanding how people make decisions about finance and commercial decisions in the corporate world, particularly through the eyes of an engineer. So really understanding how people sort of make those decisions that impact the way in which the built environment works as a whole is kind of what's led me to the exact place I am right now, which is sort of bringing all of my worlds together, basically.
Awesome. And look, as you were talking, it just brought up all of these things, all of these parallels between what you're doing and what I'm doing. And I mean, first of all, I want to acknowledge that you're really a rare breed of person to be a female, very heavily embedded in the construction and property industry, and in terms of the work that you've been doing around civil engineering and that sort of thing. That is really rare. But I see that it's given you a real understanding of how the property game is played, which is really cool.
Yeah. So I guess because I started off in that my bachelor's degree was in that property valuation, and whilst I did my sort of construction management masters a bit later on, I did it in New York at the Shack Institute of Real Estate. So it was more of a real estate focused construction degree. Whereas my construction engineering background had been very much public works and infrastructure. So really understanding how that sort of more private sector piece fit in with the whole ecosystem, and being in New York in the real estate world was just wild. So I got some really interesting experiences from that. But yeah, I've just always been fascinated with the entire ecosystem of the built environment.
Yeah, beautiful. And I love the fact that we're both from the Midlands in the UK. We're both from big families. I'm the eldest of 6. You said you're the second eldest of 7. I really resonated with what you said about having to carve away a little bit of space in your family. I got that. I just dived into the world of books, and sort of had this whole kind of fantasy life, outside of the family environment when it got too much. So I totally resonate with that. Sort of we're both done PhDs, and both ended up in property. When we first met, which was a very chance conversation and introduction through a mutual friend, I was really struck by that. It's like, that's very rare. So that, all of those things, plus the what you're doing in the world of tiny house living, I find it very inspiring. So it was natural to have you on the podcast. I'd love to understand a bit more about the journey to a tiny house. What made you make that decision? What facts did you have beforehand? And what were your goals and intentions as a result of getting a tiny house?
So I think the idea really came to me during the pandemic, which, we all had weird and wonderful ideas during the pandemic, some which were great, some which weren't so great. But for me, I was working at Bond University at the time, and the education sector was really, I know every sector got hit really hard during the pandemic. The education sector seemed to go a little bit more nuts than normal. And I was living on campus, looking after some of the students in one of the halls of residence. And I ended up buying a van and building that out into a small camper van and going off and having a few adventures on my own. Fell in love with that life and was like, oh, this is incredible. I could easily live out of this type of space and with this level of goods that I own or don't own. And I, at the same time, I was also going through a period of really thinking I don't want to be a full-time academic anymore. This is not for me. This is not my world. It doesn't align with my values. But I had started thinking about getting into the creative space. And a couple of things I did during the pandemic were I did a screenwriting course with the New York Film Academy, and I went down to NIDA and did an acting techniques course as well. So I really sort of like put myself out there. And I thought, well, if I'm going to make the move out of this career, this academic career, then I need to find a way to lower my expenses. And that was where I started thinking about tiny house living. I've been on my own for a while now and I don't have kids. So for me, it was a fairly simple solution to go, little house for one. Somebody who struggles to stay in one place for any length of time as well. I thought a house with wheels on was perfect. So that's where I started looking into the idea of these tiny homes. And after the pandemic, I actually went back to the UK for 12 months to spend some time with the family and started looking at them over there. And this would have been 2022. So it was still fairly early days. And what you were seeing on the market was really interesting solutions, but they didn't necessarily work for me. Although, with my sort of construction and engineering brain, and also I feel like that whole concept of trying to find my own space, and also some of the years I'd spent in New York in these tiny little apartments meant that space-saving solutions and problem-solving, that really excited me. So I ended up coming back to Australia in the middle of 2023 with the intention of building a tiny house. I'd had the opportunity to save all this money whilst working in the UK, and also the period I'd lived on campus with Bond University, that gave me enough to buy the frame. I wanted to buy it. I didn't want to buy a ready-built house. I knew that I wanted to have some form of involvement in the building and the design of it. So I was going to buy a lock-up shell and then build it out from there. But I ended up finding a property in North Brisbane where they would where I could live on the site. It was a very unique set of circumstances where I was basically pet sitting on this 5-acre property. I was looking after a horse and 2 large sheepdogs on top of trying to build the house. And that allowed me to go, right, well, I will just buy the frame and then start building from there. So I managed to get that all sorted, and then I basically built a component a month based on my income at the time. So I'd got through all my savings with the frame, and I was just using my income to build that component once a month. It took me 4.5 months, I think, in the end to do the whole build. And of course, along the way, I'd had the opportunity to apply for a grant through the National Association of Women in Construction, called the Bright Ideas Grant. And I had put a proposal to them to say that I wanted to set up a production company called Her Story Productions and focus on sort of getting women in STEM sort of front and centre on the TV, whether that be through TV or film. So I won the grant and started by thinking, well, what an opportunity here to actually document this build at the same time as actually doing this build. I've not built a house before and I've not made a film before, but why not try and do them both together?
You both new things at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. And the filming was essentially just me and an iPhone. I basically took on a trade to do each component, but essentially was there sort of offsider for the whole build. So it was just me, that person, and the iPhone. So we got all that footage together, and then I met our mutual friend, who was my animator on the documentary. Did some animation, put the film together, and sent it off to a film festival, and it got accepted at the Melbourne Documentary Film Festival. So it's just been an absolutely wild ride, to think that not only have I built myself a house and created this sort of space and financial freedom for myself, but I've also created a really cool piece of art, and this documentary that will exist forever as my sort of memory of the whole experience.
That is so cool. And look, there's a couple of things I want to go deeper on. I want to hone in on the financial freedom piece. So you talk about that. What do you mean? What does that look like for you?
I really wanted to lower my expenses and to be able to build up some savings so that I could take time off from work, or not be so heavily reliant on sort of being in the rat race, so to speak. And that's exactly what I've achieved. It's been a really sort of clunky, what feels like a really clunky process with the jobs that I've had, which sometimes I feel like I've been fortunate in, but other times I realise that these are all opportunities I've created for myself. So for me now, that financial freedom is being in that position where work is optional. And that's where I am at the moment. I know that I class it as sort of semi-retirement, because I know it's not I can't sustain it forever, but I can sustain it for long enough for me to be able to really step out of what I was doing to build up intentionally what I want to do next.
If you've been watching the news lately, it's easy to feel a sense of despair. Between power-hungry global leaders and absolute chaos and division, it can feel like things are spiraling out of control. It's easy to feel overwhelmed and just to have a sense of powerlessness. But there is a way to push back. We can stop looking at what they are doing and start looking at what we can do. At Women for Homes, we firmly believe that where we put our money is making a choice for the kind of world that we want to live in. Our mission is powerful: to mobilise 1 million women to invest $5,000 to end homelessness by 2030, whilst being financially empowered along the way. It's practical, it's tangible, it's something that we can do now, and it's something that we can do to take our power back. Join us at www.womenforhomes.com. That's women4homes.com.
I'm shaking my head. That's not a bad sign. That's I can't believe it, and I'm I'm really happy for you. That's really cool. And that you said the word semi-retirement and that work is optional. That's really powerful. There are not many people that I hear that from. And when I think of what the narrative at the moment, what we're hearing in the news, it's all cost of living crisis, everybody is stressed, people are losing their jobs, whereas you're sitting there talking about semi-retirement, and it came from a very intentional decision to lower your expenses and live in a tiny house. That's just phenomenal.
Yeah, thanks. It's been a really interesting experience from many levels, because there's been times when living in the house has been quite challenging. At the start, when I had to learn to live in the house, because it's not like living in a normal home, and there was times when I got a bit resentful of it, feeling that I sort of had to be here. But then I was also able to remind myself that, sort of being the age that I am, sort of 47, and being smack bang in the heart of perimenopause, that I was like, look what I've done. I've created myself a little capsule in the woods to protect myself whilst I go through this period of my life. And that is, I sort of described it to a friend once as a radical act of self-love. I was like, yeah, look what I've done. This is, I wish I could help other people achieve this, because it feels really empowering.
Yeah. Well, look, as a woman, building something for yourself, having the financial freedom and the flexibility that brings, like, all power to you. And like I said, there's not that many people that I've had this kind of conversation with. In fact, it's often the opposite. I would like to know about the practicalities of tiny house living, because I live in a small house. It's not a tiny house, but it's a small 3-bedroom cottage, and I have my husband and 2 children, and they're great. Sometimes I feel it's a little bit small for all of us. And then I hear you speak, and I think, okay, well, how much space are we talking about, really? And I'm guessing that for you, that it's about the learning how to live in a tiny house is about treating each space as having multiple jobs, rather than, this is the sitting room and this is the kitchen. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the documentary, essentially, every time I watch it back, because it gets played now at all the tiny house expos, and every time I watch it back, I have a little chuckle to myself, because there's a point in it where I've finished putting all of the internal walls in, and I'm standing talking to the camera saying, this is livable, I can live in this. And I've actually got cables hanging out the walls because I've not put the plugs on or anything yet, but I'm convinced that I can live in this house. And that's essentially what I did. I moved into it at a very, at the earliest point that I could. So I had no kitchen. I had no sink. I had a bathroom sink, but I didn't have a kitchen sink, obviously. I didn't have electricity for the first 5 weeks. Or not proper electricity. I had enough to run the hot water system and the compost loo fan. But learning to live on the on because I rent land on somebody else's property, and learning to live in that way, learning to live with a grey water system, learning to live with a compost toilet, and the furniture that I moved in with originally was not suitable, but it was the furniture that I had, and it wasn't until I'd lived in it for about 12 months that I was able to sort of replace that furniture and get it more intentional. So I've got intentional spaces now. So where I'm sitting right now is right next to the big picture window, with my desk and my sofa behind me. And then, in the middle part of this small house, I've got my kitchen, which is an intentional kitchen now, rather than being a kitchen and an office. And then I've got my bathroom and my bedroom. So it does take a while to just get used to that space and learn how to live in it most effectively. But yeah, it's incredibly cozy, and it does lead you to live more intentionally with all of your possessions, and think about what it is exactly you need and what you don't need, and yeah, so you sort of end up living a much more sustainable life.
You brought up the possessions and living intentionally. So my husband went away to be with his parents overseas for a little while. And he came back with some family heirlooms, which are amazing. Like, I'm absolutely not knocking them at all. But it has made me think of, well, we have a lot of stuff, and we're also inheriting more stuff over time. So, I bring this up just because I'm a little bit daunted by the, sort of slimming down the stuff to just have enough room in a tiny house. But let's change gears a little bit. That's my dauntedness can wait. What I'd love to understand is how much space do you actually have in your tiny house, and what's the layout of it?
Yeah, okay. So it's 9 meters by 2.4. So I went 2.4 wide because that is essentially the width of a caravan, and that's kind of one of the key regulations that allows tiny houses on wheels to kind of exist, is that they are built with the intention of being like a caravan. 9 meters is probably a decent size caravan. But that's essentially the space that I'm working with. I've got a downstairs bedroom, because I know a lot of, when people think of tiny homes, they think of little loft spaces with bedrooms in. But the first couple that I went to look at, thankfully I'd done a pretty big exercise class that morning, which meant that climbing into those loft spaces when I went to view them was like, no, this isn't going to happen. I need a downstairs bedroom. So, I feel like I've used the space well. I've probably got bigger furniture in here than I need, which means that I could afford to downsize some of that furniture. I don't have a deck yet. I've somehow managed 2 years without a deck, but that is on its way. Should be here sometime, hopefully in July. And that is essentially exactly the same footprint. Oh, it's actually going to be wider. Sorry, it's going to be 3 meters wide. So that will give me so much more space to be outside, and to take a lot of my sort of seating and cooking and all that kind of stuff outside. So it's really going to change the space again once that arrives.
Yeah, very cool. And I feel like I'm jumping back a little bit, but I did want to talk about the financial aspect of it, because I was talking to a lady called Laura Lynch, she's a financial advisor in the US, and she downsized to a tiny house and now helps other people do the same. And one of the things that she brought up was around the mortgages. So she was in a position where and again, the pandemic cleared a lot of stuff for a lot of people. But she had a house, maybe lost her job, or sort of the job was a bit precarious, and she thought, we are paying double the amount of the cost of the house. So let's say the house was 450,000, she was paying that again in terms of interest. And she looked at that situation and just went, it doesn't make sense. So when she went to tiny house living, she had this real sense of the financial freedom, because she wasn't paying a mortgage and paying the interest on top of that as well. And for her, that was where the light bulb went off, or went on. And when she talks to people now, she can it's almost like this is the figure that you are going to be paying for your lifetime. Is it worth it? And tiny house living isn't for everybody, but a lot of people are making the decision, no, it's not, and therefore tiny house living can offer a different alternative. One thing for me, one question I have is around, you mentioned that you're renting the land on which it's parked. So how easy is that to do? Because that seems to me that could be a bit of a bottleneck, because not a lot of people would feel comfortable or even know that that's an option, that they can rent their land out for that.
Yeah, that's how most people are doing this. For living in anyway. There is obviously a lot of people that are buying tiny homes for Airbnb and that kind of thing, and they're most likely putting it on their own land. But there is a huge community of people who want to help, and also just not just help people find somewhere to put their tiny homes, but also they might need help themselves, and therefore that's why they're putting out an invitation to somebody to come and join them on their land. And the majority of it is happening on Facebook. So there are some very active Facebook groups, and I'll give you the details for those to share, that have lots of tiny home expertise on there, but that's where you get a lot of people advertising that they want somewhere to put their tiny home, and you get a lot of landowners advertising space to bring your tiny home. And they are incredibly active. That's where I found both of my sites, the one to build on and the one that it's now on in the Northern Rivers. So, and you have to have a certain risk profile to be even enter into those types of conversations. But, for me, for example, I brought a friend with me to come and look at the property and to get a good feel for the surroundings, good feel for the landowner, to make sure that we were sort of aligned and felt like it was going to work, and it can be a daunting prospect, but I think if you're prepared to take that risk, the benefits are significant.
Okay, so tell me about the benefits. Well, other than the financial and you're creating the space for yourself, and I'm thinking in terms more about the community aspect of that. What are you seeing that are the benefits?
So I'm on a property with a primary residence. They've also turned their shed into a 3-bedroom house, or a shouse, which is apparently a thing.
I've heard that.
And then at the other end of the property, there's myself and there's another person in their tiny house as well. And that for me has been incredible, because I'd lived on a property whilst building this house, which allowed me to get used to being out on a property on my own. But having somebody close by who's in exactly the same boat, of a similar age and with similar values, means that we're looking out for each other. And I'm not just sort of out in the sticks, completely isolated. So yeah, there's plenty of opportunity. I've got as part of the Australian Tiny House Association, there's a couple of us on the executive team who live in tiny houses, and there's one woman that lives entirely on her own, but with a property, the primary residence close by, and then there's another woman who lives on a property with 10 others, on a bit of an eco farm situation, and none of us have any regrets whatsoever. It's a really, I don't really know how to put it into words, but other than that financial freedom, there's just that lifestyle freedom as well. It's not until I jump in the car and sort of drive up to Brisbane to visit friends that I'm like, oh, I want to be back out in the in the countryside and away from just that overwhelming sort of city life. It's I've created the physical and metaphorical space for myself is how I think about it.
Beautiful. I want to just quickly talk about regulations, and because that I know is something that trips up a lot of people. So, and I know it also that it's location specific, but what are some of the common sort of regulations that it doesn't matter where you are, you kind of have to abide by those?
So each state has its own regulations, and those should essentially trump local councils. However, each local council has their own view on tiny houses. Some are quite aggressive, but mostly, and I'll stress this point, most councils are tiny house positive, right? They have got far greater issues to deal with, and this is how I talk about it at expos when I'm talking to people who come and see me at the ATHA stand. Is as long as you good favour with your neighbours, then you're good to go in terms of putting your tiny house on a piece of land. As soon as a neighbour complains to the council, they have to get involved, and that's the only reason that they do. Right? I'm pretty sure that the area I'm in and the area of a few others of us are in are fairly conscious of the fact that there are tiny homes all over the place, but they're quite happy for them to just sit there and do nothing, right? If they're in view of the road or the public, or you have those neighbours complaining, then that's where there's an issue with the councils. Otherwise, trying to navigate each individual council and their definitions and their unique restrictions is a really, really muddy grey area. So what we're trying to do at the Australian Tiny House Association now is put together a template for a 2-year permit that allows you to park your tiny house, in a place that where you and the landowner are in agreement. And obviously that's going to need to be amended based on the individual issues within each state. But that's a starting point. We also have a template for planning policy to give to councils to help them understand how to build that framework. Because there are some, like Esperance over in Western Australia, that was one of the first councils to actually make a tiny house friendly policy. And there's more and more popping up. So people are beginning to appreciate that this is a solution. It's not the only solution, but it is a solution for a number of people in this current housing crisis.
And what I love about what you've shared is the level of agency that you've brought to this whole conversation. So a lot of people are talking about the housing crisis and feeling quite powerless, whereas in your case, you've actually done something about that and is just so much more better off, not just financially, but I get the sense kind of you're just feeling really fulfilled and really happy with your life and your decisions. So this has been really inspirational, and I'd love to hear from you about if somebody is listening to this or watching this and they think, oh, sign me up, where can I get my own tiny house? How can they get a hold of you to help them navigate that, all the questions that they may have?
Yeah, okay, so there's a couple of ways. Through the Australian Tiny House Association, they can get in contact with us through that. I've also got my website with my documentary on, and I do actually have a discount code for anyone that's listening to the podcast that I can give you to access that documentary, and that is Tiny Solution to a Big Problem. All one word is the website. The Instagram is exactly the same. That's what I was using to sort of build that audience before I got that documentary out there. But yeah, those are sort of the key ways of getting in touch, and we would love to be able to help and support people, help them navigate the world of tiny homes. There's more and more sort of support services popping up now, other than just builders and us. There's more and more consultants popping up in this space to help people navigate, because there's so many questions to start from. Do I need the land? Where do I start? Do I get a builder first, or do I get the land? And all these kinds of things. So we can help people connect in that way. And the other thing that's important to mention is one of the things we're working on at ATHA is helping people understand pathways of using a tiny house to leverage yourself. So it's not a case of I'm going to live in a tiny house forever. You might live in a tiny house for a period of time so that you can build up a substantial amount of savings or create the space for yourself like I have. So there's multiple ways in which you can use this tiny house setup, depending on where you're at in your life and what you're trying to.
And I love that, actually, because when you said that, I thought how beautiful it would be for a couple to their first home is a tiny house. They save their money, they can buy their forever, well, not necessarily forever home, they can buy a home, and the tiny home can then be used to help somebody else go through that cycle as well. And I love that, and I love the sharing economy that is around all of this, and the community that can be built and is being built around tiny house living as well. So Danielle, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us on the podcast and sharing your experiences. And I'm so excited to hear what comes next for you, and so happy to be able to share this with my audience as well.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I've really enjoyed it.